And our season of Elvis films continues on Monday, when he gives one of his greatest performances, playing a nightclub singer who becomes enmeshed in the dirty dealings of the underworld. King Creole at 5 o'clock on Monday. And a reminder that Elvis Presley comes under the spotlight on Radio 2 this evening, when Dave Jelly will be appraising the distinguished career of the King of Rock and Roll. That's at 10:30 on Radio 2.
The Frankfurt Motor Show is always one of the biggest of the year, with enough stands and exhibitions to challenge the enthusiasm of even the most committed motoring journalist. But this year, the tired legs and the aching feet are well worth it, because the show is crammed with new models. Top Gear kicks off its autumn series here at Frankfurt, with a look, among other things, at the BMW 850 and the Audi Cabriolet, as well as road tests on the new Mercedes SL and the Citroën XM. And over the next 10 weeks, we'll have our usual fascinating mix of classic cars and new models, motorsport and the controversies that affect the world of motoring.
BBC One's Top of the Pops is already in top gear, with the latest chart toppers introduced by Andy Crane and Simon Mayo. In just over 20 minutes here on 2, we'll be catching up on the progress of the Victorian kitchen garden. First, we're catching up on the progress at today's Social and Liberal Democrats conference with David Dimbleby and Vivian White.
Tomorrow is the final day of the Democratic Conference here at Brighton, and some representatives, to say nothing of some journalists covering it, would add, not a moment too soon. It has at times seemed interminable, and there's pressure apparently to shorten it next year. The question posed at the start of the week remains largely unanswered. Perhaps it's not answerable, but we'll have another go tonight. How does this party fill the political gap that they believe is there, but which at only 7% in the polls, they show no signs as yet of filling? I'll be talking about the problems they face with some of the party's younger blood, old heads on young shoulders, Archie Kirkwood, who's in charge of campaigning, Matthew Taylor, who's in charge of communications with him, and Charles Kennedy, the trade and industry spokesman. Now, tomorrow is Paddy Ashdown's main speech, in which he will set out the themes that he thinks this party should concentrate on. And he's had some small cheer from the latest opinion poll, which came out in today's Guardian, which once again put the Democrats ahead of the Greens, but that, after all, is the least of their ambitions. There's the figures, the Labour Party 10 points ahead of the Tories. For the rest, today, the conference trundled through debates on a number of subjects, carrying motions in favour of more spending on basic science to improve research, calling for a Bill of Rights and a Freedom of Information Act, and for strict enforcement of anti-pollution measures by local authorities. Well, now Vivian White reports first on the highlights of today's conference.
He is press officer for Yorkshire and Humberside Young
Youth must have its fling, and young Liberals there have been before, but not as young as this.
At 16, I speak to you as a veteran in politics. Having spent the last 6 years, yes, 6 years since the age of 10, canvassing and trudging the streets of this nation for this cause.
He's 2 years too young to vote, though the Dems would like to change all that. But he was old enough to overrun and take the time to run for office.
Ashley, sorry, I don't want to stop you.
My ambition is to become Britain's youngest MP. And my message to the people out there is support us today, because you'll be supporting the party of tomorrow.
Can I advise the young man who said his ambition is to be a young MP or the youngest? The road for such a person is full of treacherous events. I was the young MP in 1970, and look at me now.
15 years ago, he was the Labour MP for Carmarthen. He came here via the SDP, to the now merged party that dare not speak its name.
Don't be afraid of using the word liberal. It was good enough for Gladstone. It was good enough for Gladstone. It was good enough for Lloyd George. It was good enough for Martin Luther King. It was good enough for Mandela. It's good enough for me.
Like young Ashley Ashton Byrne before him, Gwenoro Jones overran. But then Lloyd George's orations used to last 5 hours. The reborn Liberals rose to praise him.
So the message is simple. Where we have the power and influence over the environment, we are doing the business. Now,
Malcolm Bruce brought Liberal praise for Sutton Council from the Daily Mail for being London's cleanest borough.
it is a lesson in democracy which other boroughs should take to heart. For through the willing cooperation of free people, the most formidable difficulties can be overcome. Of course, what the Daily Mail doesn't say, it wouldn't, would it, is that we control Sutton Council, and that's why they won the award.
He knocked the papers, knocked the Greens, and knocked Green Tories too.
Really, at the end of the day, the only thing that's green about the Tories are their wellies.
Many issues we have sought to put on the political agenda. Lead-free, banning CFCs, recycling, are becoming accepted practice. This motion is about moving the consensus forward again. Getting local councils to use not just lead-free, but vehicles with catalytic converters or running on gas. Not just banning CFCs, but recycling them. Putting the agenda of practical green politics right at the heart of the political debate and of political action.
And getting a slice of political action, even in local councils, is so sweet. It stops Dems feeling just worth 7%. Old Charles Kennedy made it into Parliament and told the youngest hopeful all about it.
If you're not careful, and if you let people like him set you up as a boy wonder, the Commons will soon try and cut you off at the knees. So you've got to go about it in a diplomatic fashion.
So you felt very young at first?
Oh yes, without any shadow of a doubt, yeah. But being in the alliance, I aged rapidly.
Now let's talk about this conference. Archie Kirkwood, is a lacklustre conference a sign of a lacklustre party?
Well, let me tell you what I think has come from this conference. It's something that no comment really has been made on at all, in my view. We've only been a party for just over a year now, and there were all sorts of anticipated difficulties about the policy-making process. Now, let me tell you, the policy goods that we've unveiled and unfurled at this conference to the delegates are second to none in terms of the green papers, the white papers, the campaign packs that we've been putting through the policy-making process and successfully unveiling.
But they're no different from what you had when you were in the alliance with the SDP.
Well, but
according to your leader.
Yeah, but of course, you're hamstrung if you don't have policy that's concise and coherent and relevant to today's political problems. We've now got that. The delegates will leave this week with a whole new, fresh prospectus, and I think Paddy will put the seal on that tomorrow, because his own new thinking in his own new book is a major and significant contribution to that. So we've made a major, major advance, and we're able to give our troops ammunition to go back to the constituencies and start campaigning, which is where our strength really lies.
Haven't you missed out by not having any major debates on the big issues the electorate are concerned with? I mean, all the debates have been on green papers and issues like that. Nothing on health, no major debate on the economy, no debate on education, nothing on pensions, privatisation, energy. The list of things that the Tories and Labour will be going at and getting the headlines have been absent here.
Well, I wonder where you've been for some of the debates.
Well, I'll tell you exactly where I've been. I've been sitting through them, which is more than most of your representatives have.
We started the week with a controversial debate on health. We've just put forward a multilateralist defence policy, and if it had been unilateralist, we'd have seen nothing but that in screaming headlines in every national newspaper, and quite rightly too. We debated our industrial strategy, and today we debated the environment. Now, if those aren't salient issues and voters' concerns, and throw in the poll tax, the education system, and what happened in terms of animal welfare rights and that dreadful story that we saw yesterday, I don't know what is.
Then why were you complaining this afternoon about internal navel-gazing in the face of the nation? A shop window via the media and the nation, yet here we are again having an afternoon of navel-gazing. Why did you say that?
Because we were spending 2 hours on constitutional amendments, and I would rather see us debate even more policy.
What do you think about it from the communications point of view? I mean, you had a report before this conference began about the standing of the party, that it was in a most serious and damaging position. What's been done this week that actually changes that?
We've actually had the opportunity to start getting across the message about the things we stand for, and if you like, have an opportunity to start defining that, not just in terms of policy, and Charles has been quite right to list the policy areas that we've covered, but also, I think, to come together in terms of a coherent philosophy as well. Paddy's book has done that, and also we've had this message throughout running about people first, about the only party in this country that actually cares about the individual rather than institutions, be they trade unions or business.
But you're in the business of communications, both of you, of selling this party. I mean, if this were a kind of brand of soap, you'd have withdrawn it by now, wouldn't you?
That's nonsense. I mean...
Well, 7% in the polls. Looking at the figures, it's probably worse than the Liberal Party was at in the 50s. People say it was the same. It's probably worse.
Well, I mean, there's no denying that the last 12 months has been a difficult hand for us to play politically. But of course, it was always going to be difficult. I think it's a much longer game than the media or anybody else understand. I think that we've got between now and the next general election to pick ourselves up and go out and start promoting what it is we have to sell. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience in my own constituency and up and down the country, there is a demand for a viable alternative, a political vehicle, which will be an alternative to Thatcherism and socialism. And of course, we have still got to clear some of the ground, because in the radical centre, it's a fairly crowded position to be in. But we, I think, over the next 12 months, will have to show ourselves to have the battalions, the clout, the resources and the enthusiasm to actually command that agenda in the radical centre, and that's what this week, I think, has substantially contributed towards.
How much damage have you been doing to yourselves over the past 2 years by losing the people who it was always said were going to join you in the centre, people who hadn't previously been interested in politics, people who didn't believe in the two-party system? They've seen you wrangling, and still up to a point wrangling now.
Yeah.
How much damage has that done?
It's done immense damage. It's a large part of the reason why we're on 7%. There's no doubt about that. That's a self-inflicted wound. I think what's happened this week is that you couldn't put all that right in 5 days here in Brighton. You could certainly have put it wrong without any hope of recovery thereafter. And I think we've taken a sufficient number of substantial steps that we're now on the right way forward.
Can I ask you this? If your aim is to get the Tories out of office, to end Mrs. Thatcher's period in government, if that is your prime aim, which it seems to me to be, why don't you seriously consider making some arrangement with the Labour Party that would mean that in those seats in the south where Labour hasn't a hope of winning, and you do have a hope, you might be able to get rid of the Tories, and leave them to get rid of the Tories in areas in the north where you can't? Why don't you seriously consider that?
I think the problem with that is that it is more than just getting rid of Mrs. Thatcher. Yes, Mrs. Thatcher must go, but it will not do to simply nail Neil Kinnock's name to the front door on Downing Street. He wants exactly the same things in the same system. He wants power for Neil Kinnock. What we're about is changing the system itself and giving power to people, and that is fundamentally different.
But the proposal of making some arrangement with Labour, and I'm not talking about the details of it, for goodness sake, the proposal of making some arrangement with Labour is that the two parties would go together into government, and you'd have a position where you could argue some of those points. At the moment, you just seem to fritter your time away, various members of you, talking about pacts with other minor parties.
I think talking about pacts with other parties is a bit of frittering, and I don't think you've seen any of the three of us doing that here this week. The fact is, there's no point in talking about a pact with the Labour Party for a reason which you, as somebody who observes in equal detail Labour conferences, know probably better than we do. You ain't going to get a pact with the Labour Party, even were it desirable, which I don't think it is. And secondly, if we're talking about restoring our identity as a political movement, getting back all those people you referred to that were the first-time people into politics with the SDP and then the Alliance, you won't do it if you start clouding the horizon with talks of deals, permutations, alliances and arrangements.
And you're not the only member of this party who used to belong to the Labour Party. You've seen the way the Labour Party, and you've had reports on the way the Labour Party is, in the views of the people who support your aims, becoming more moderate. Right? If that happens, supposing there's not a cigarette papers, to use Ashdown's word, difference between the policies of this party and the Labour Party, would it not be sensible at least to begin feeling your way towards some alliance with them, or agreement with them?
Well, I don't think our leader was using the phrase cigarette paper in relation to the Labour Party. The Labour Party is hostile to constitutional reform. It's a conservative party with a small c. It doesn't give its individual members party democracy, and it still remains unconvinced itself about a sensible defence policy. So there's not much of a basis for arrangement there.
It's also paid for entirely by the trade union movement. Sure. I mean, look, you complain that we're not cutting an image and a dash for ourselves, and then you proceed to direct the rest of the interview as to why we should sublimate our own policies even more closely with other parties. We are supposed to be something that's different, and trying to accommodate ourselves to the Labour Party in a pre-electoral arrangement, I think, just damages that ability for us to